Ibrahim Traoré, the young and outspoken leader of Burkina Faso, has once again captured the world's attention, this time with his reaction to a historic discovery in neighboring Ghana. Just days ago, miners in the Ashanti region of Ghana uncovered what is being called the world's largest gold rock ever found. The massive nugget, estimated to weigh several tons and worth billions of dollars, was unearthed during a routine mining operation and immediately made headlines across Africa and beyond. While Ghanaians celebrated the find as a sign of their nation's rich natural resources and mining prowess, leaders across the region began to weigh in on what such a discovery means for West Africa as a whole. And as expected, Ibrahim Traoré did not stay silent. In a fiery yet measured speech delivered in Ouagadougou, Traoré expressed both congratulations to Ghana and deep concern over how such wealth would be managed. His tone struck a balance between regional solidarity and a clear warning about the exploitation of Africa's natural resources by foreign interests. Traoré began by praising the Ghanaian people for their hard work and resilience, noting that the gold rock symbolizes the enormous, untapped potential of Africa. He called it a gift from the soil of Africa to her children, emphasizing that it is the people of Ghana and Africa more broadly who should benefit from this treasure, not foreign corporations or a select few elites. Traoré then quickly shifted his focus to the long and painful history of resource exploitation on the continent. He reminded listeners of how Africa's gold, diamonds, and other resources have historically been plundered by colonial powers and, more recently, by multinational corporations with little regard for the welfare of local populations. "We cannot," he declared, "stand by and watch another chapter of our continent's wealth being stolen while our people remain poor. Ghana's gold must stay in Ghana and for Ghana." His words drew applause and resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. As social media buzzed with clips of his speech, the Burkina Faso leader also offered to work with Ghana to strengthen regional cooperation on natural resource governance. He proposed the creation of a West African resource coalition that would enable countries like Burkina Faso, Ghana, Mali, Niger, and others to share best practices, negotiate better terms with international companies, and ensure transparency in mining contracts. Traoré's suggestion underlined his vision of a united Africa that can stand up to global economic pressures and chart its own course of development. Notably, Traoré expressed concerns about security implications as well. The Sahel region has been plagued by instability, terrorism, and armed groups for years, and he warned that such a discovery could make Ghana a target for illicit actors seeking to fund their operations through illegal gold trade. He urged Ghana to step up security measures around mining areas and offered Burkina Faso's assistance in intelligence sharing and joint operations if necessary. "We cannot allow gold to become a curse for our brothers and sisters," he said. "It must be a blessing, and we must protect it." Observers have noted that Traoré's comments reflect his consistent stance on Africa First policies and resistance to external exploitation. Since coming to power, he has nationalized certain mining operations in Burkina Faso, expelled some foreign troops and companies, and prioritized deals that directly benefit his country. His reaction to Ghana's gold discovery is seen by many as a continuation of his commitment to defending African sovereignty and dignity. On the streets of Ouagadougou and Accra alike, ordinary citizens have had mixed reactions to Traoré's speech. Many praised him for speaking truth to power and expressing solidarity, while others wondered whether his rhetoric might strain relations with Ghana's government, which has historically been more open to foreign investment. Ghanaian officials have not yet responded directly to his remarks, but sources close to the administration say there is appreciation for the congratulations and an openness to discuss regional cooperation on mining policies. Meanwhile, economic analysts are predicting that the discovery of such a massive gold rock could have a significant impact on global markets and Ghana's economy. Gold prices have already seen slight fluctuations as investors react to the news. If properly managed, the find could help Ghana boost its revenues, improve infrastructure, and fund social programs. But, as Traoré warned, mismanagement or corruption could also turn this opportunity into a source of conflict and inequality. Across social media platforms, the hashtag #AfricaGold for Africans began trending shortly after Traoré's speech, with users sharing messages of unity and calls for African governments to reclaim control over their resources. In Burkina Faso, murals of Traoré alongside a shining gold rock have already appeared in some neighborhoods, symbolizing his role as a defender of African wealth. Some international media outlets, however, criticized Traoré's tone as confrontational, arguing that his comments might deter much-needed investment in the region. But his supporters argue that Africa can no longer afford to be passive while others profit at her expense. As the dust settles from this historic discovery, all eyes are now on Ghana's next move and whether leaders there will heed Traoré's call to ensure that the people of Africa are the primary beneficiaries of the continent's riches. For Traoré, it seems, the discovery of the world's largest gold rock is not just about Ghana, it's about the larger struggle for African autonomy, justice, and pride. Only time will tell how this moment will shape the future of West Africa, and whether Traoré's bold words will inspire concrete action. But one thing is clear. In a region where resources have too often been a source of division and exploitation, the discovery of Ghana's gold has once again brought to the forefront a powerful conversation about who truly owns Africa's wealth. And Ibrahim Traoré, as always, is making sure his voice is heard. Not long after his passionate reaction to Ghana's historic gold discovery, Ibrahim Traoré found himself facing another defining moment for both his leadership and the region. This time, the focus shifted from gold to something even more precious: the lives of Africa's children. Just a week after his speech on resource sovereignty, news broke of a tragic incident on the Burkina Faso-Mali border. A convoy of civilians fleeing violence in northern Mali was ambushed by an armed group, leaving dozens dead and many more injured. Among the victims were women and children, families who had already been displaced multiple times due to ongoing conflict. In the Sahel, the attack sent shockwaves across the region and once again highlighted the human cost of the instability plaguing West Africa. Traoré, or E-Acute, immediately addressed the nation. His voice, firm yet clearly emotional, carried across television screens and radios as he mourned the lives lost. "Each child we lose to this senseless violence," he said, "is a dream stolen, a future extinguished, and a wound in the heart of Africa." He went on to condemn the armed groups operating in the Sahel, calling them enemies of the people and vowing to strengthen Burkina Faso's security forces to better protect civilians. But his speech didn't stop there. Traoré took the opportunity to call on neighboring countries, the African Union, and even the United Nations to rethink their strategies in the region. "Our people do not need foreign armies camping on our soil without results," he said bluntly. "What we need is a united African front, with our own sons and daughters defending their mothers and fathers, their brothers and sisters." His words were widely interpreted as another pushback against what he sees as ineffective and sometimes self-serving foreign military interventions in the Sahel. As the nation grieved, Traoré traveled to the border region himself to meet survivors and comfort families. Footage of him walking through the dusty village, holding the hands of children, sitting with mourning mothers, and promising justice went viral on social media. Many praised his willingness to be on the ground, to see the suffering with his own eyes, and to stand alongside his people at their most vulnerable moment. But his response didn't end with words and symbolic gestures. Within days, his government announced a new initiative called Operation Shield of the Sahel, a coordinated security plan to improve intelligence sharing, strengthen border defenses, and deploy more troops to key areas prone to attacks. Traoré also pledged to increase support for displaced families, ensuring they have food, shelter, and schooling for their children while longer-term solutions are pursued. International reactions were mixed. Some humanitarian organizations applauded the focus on protecting civilians, while others expressed concern over reports of potential human rights abuses by security forces. Western governments reiterated calls for dialogue with armed groups, a suggestion Traoré dismissed in his characteristic forthright style. "You cannot negotiate with those who burn our villages and slaughter our children. Peace must come with justice." His response to the attack and the larger conversation it sparked about Africa's right to determine its own security strategy further solidified Traoré's image among his supporters as a fearless defender of African dignity and sovereignty. The days following the tragedy, murals appeared in Ouagadougou showing him standing with a child in his arms, flanked by soldiers and civilians with the words, "Our leader, our shield." On social media, hashtags like #Justice for the SAHEL and #Africa United Against Terror began trending, fueled by citizens across West Africa, demanding more accountability and action from their own governments. Traoré's critics argue that his hardline approach risks further militarizing an already volatile region and alienating international partners. But to his supporters, particularly the young and the marginalized, his unwavering stance is a source of pride and hope. As Burkina Faso buries its dead and braces for the difficult road ahead, one thing is clear: Ibrahim Traoré is determined to confront the region's crises head-on, whether it's reclaiming Africa's stolen wealth or protecting her most vulnerable. In his eyes, every challenge is another opportunity to stand up for his people, and every tragedy is another reminder of why Africa must rise, united and unafraid. And as he told a grieving mother in that border village, "Your son's life was not lost in vain. We will build a future where no child of Africa lives in fear. That is my promise and our shared duty." Barely 2 weeks after the tragic attack on the Burkina Faso-Mali border, another crisis demanded Ibrahim Traoré's attention, this time one that struck at the very heart of his vision for Africa's independence. News began circulating that a powerful consortium of foreign mining corporations, mostly based in Europe and North America, had signed secretive new agreements with officials in a neighboring West African country. The deals would grant these corporations exclusive rights to vast tracts of land rich in gold, lithium, and rare earth minerals, resources crucial for the global tech and renewable energy industries. Even worse, leaked documents showed that the contracts allowed the companies to export nearly all of the minerals with minimal taxes and virtually no reinvestment into the local economy. For Traoré, the revelations felt like history repeating itself, another example of Africa's riches being siphoned away while her people remained poor. And as details emerged that the agreements had been brokered quietly, without public consultation or transparency, outrage grew across the region. Traoré didn't hesitate to speak out. In a nationally televised address, he denounced what he called a new colonial robbery and demanded that the contracts be rescinded. "Our resources," he declared, "are not the spoils of war to be handed out to foreign masters. They are the inheritance of the African people to be used for our own development." His speech sparked protests in several West African capitals, with thousands of demonstrators taking to the streets carrying signs that read "Africa is not for sale" and "Our land, our future." In Burkina Faso, students and workers organized rallies outside foreign embassies, demanding accountability and greater sovereignty over the continent's resources. Traoré followed his words with action. He called an emergency summit of West African leaders in Ouagadougou to discuss a unified response to the deals and to draft a regional framework for resource governance. At the summit, attended by heads of state, ministers, and civil society leaders from across ECOWAS, Traoré passionately argued for a new African resource charter. The proposed charter included provisions for full transparency of all mining contracts, mandatory community consultations before any deals are signed, fair profit-sharing agreements, and strict environmental safeguards. It also called for the creation of a West African sovereign wealth fund that would collect revenues from resource exports and invest them into education, healthcare, and infrastructure across the region. While some leaders expressed skepticism about antagonizing foreign investors, others rallied behind Traoré's vision. The presidents of Mali and Guinea were especially vocal in their support, with Mali's leader remarking, "For too long, we have begged at the tables of others while they eat from our plates. It is time we sit at our own table." In his closing remarks at the summit, Traoré warned of the consequences of inaction. "If we continue on this path," he said, "we will leave our children nothing but dust and broken dreams. But if we act with courage and unity, we can build a continent that thrives on its own terms, a continent that owns its future." His words resonated far beyond the walls of the conference hall. Across Africa, media outlets hailed the summit as a turning point in the struggle for economic sovereignty. Opinion pieces praised Traoré as a young leader willing to challenge the status quo, and hashtags like #ResourceJustice and #Africa owns its wealth trended on social media for days. Predictably, the foreign corporations at the center of the controversy pushed back. Their representatives warned of legal action and threatened to withdraw investment from the region. Western governments expressed concern over the direction of Traoré's rhetoric, urging balanced and investor-friendly policies. But Traoré, undeterred, responded with characteristic defiance. "If they leave, others will come," he said in an interview. "And if no one comes, we will develop our own capacities. We are no longer slaves to their greed." In Burkina Faso, the government launched a series of public forums to educate citizens about how mining revenues are used and to solicit feedback on future projects. State-run media began airing documentaries exposing decades of exploitation by foreign interests. Murals appeared across Ouagadougou showing Traoré standing on a pile of gold bars holding a Burkina Faso flag, with the words, "The wealth of Africa belongs to Africa." Even critics who had previously accused Traoré of being too radical began to admit that his boldness was sparking an overdue conversation across the continent. Some experts pointed out that his push for transparency and accountability could actually make Africa more attractive to responsible investors in the long run. For Traoré, though, it was never just about investment. It was about dignity, and about ensuring that the sacrifices of past generations were not wasted. In a visit to a mining town in northern Burkina Faso, he told workers gathered to greet him, "Our grandparents dug these mines for others and lived poor. Our parents saw our gold shipped away while they went hungry. But our children will see these riches build their schools, their hospitals, their roads. That is my promise to you. That is the Africa we must fight for." Asterisk as night fell on the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, the words of a young protester summed up the mood of a continent waking up to its own power. We are not afraid anymore. This is our land, and this is our time. Asterisk for Ibrahim Traoré, it was yet another chapter in his mission to rewrite Africa's story, one bold, unapologetic stand at a time. Asterisk just weeks after igniting a wave of protests and policy debates over foreign mining contracts in West Africa, Ibrahim Traoré was thrust into yet another defining moment, this time on the world stage. Asterisk. The African Union had called an extraordinary summit in Addis Ababa to discuss a matter that had been looming over the continent, a sweeping new climate initiative spearheaded by a coalition of Western nations. The initiative, presented as a FAZAMAT plan to help Africa combat climate change, promised billions in funding for renewable energy projects, conservation programs, and carbon offset schemes. But buried in the fine print of the agreement were clauses that would grant foreign entities significant control over large swaths of African land and forests, ostensibly to preserve them as carbon sinks. Asterisk as African leaders gathered to discuss the proposal, sharp divisions emerged. Some saw it as an opportunity to secure much-needed funding for development while addressing environmental concerns. Others, however, feared it was yet another veiled attempt at land-grabbing and resource control, disguised as climate action. Asterisk when Traoré took the floor, the mood in the room shifted. Known for his unapologetic rhetoric, he did not disappoint. Asterisk. He began by acknowledging the reality of climate change and the disproportionate impact it has on Africa. Droughts, floods, and desertification, he noted, are devastating African communities that contribute the least to global emissions. We are not blind to the crisis, he said, but we will not trade our sovereignty for scraps of charity. Asterisk, he went on to dismantle the Western proposal point by point, highlighting how it prioritized the interests of wealthy nations and corporations at the expense of African farmers, herders, and indigenous communities who depend on the very lands being targeted. They tell us our forests are the lungs of the world, he said, his voice rising. Yet when our children need medicine, when our people need food, those same lungs suffocate us with poverty. Asterisk Traoré's speech electrified the summit. Hull. He proposed an alternative African-led climate strategy that would allow African nations to retain full ownership and management of their lands while investing in locally driven renewable energy, reforestation, and climate adaptation programs. He called for the creation of a Pan-African Green Fund, financed through a combination of domestic resources and fair international contributions, to implement this vision. Asterisk his fiery call for climate justice, not climate colonialism, was met with a standing ovation from many African delegates, and icy silence from a handful of Western observers in the room. Asterisk later that evening, clips of his speech went viral, with hashtags like #AfricaForAfricans and #ClimateJustice trending. Globally, across the continent, environmental activists and youth movements rallied behind his vision, organizing marches and digital campaigns demanding African control over climate policies. Asterisk, but not everyone was supportive. Some African leaders expressed concern that his defiance might jeopardize badly needed funding and strain diplomatic relations with donor nations. Western governments issued carefully worded statements, reiterating their commitment to partnership while privately pressuring the O to endorse the original proposal. Asterisk Traoré, however, stood firm. In a press conference after the summit, he addressed reporters directly. Asterisk. If the world truly believes in partnership, let it begin by treating us as equals. We will not accept to become tenants on our own soil, nor will we allow our people to become refugees of their own lands under the guise of saving the planet. Africa's future will be decided in Africa, not in the boardrooms of corporations that poisoned the earth in the first place. In the weeks that followed, his stance spurred renewed debate within the O, and a special working group was established to draft a homegrown African climate strategy, one that would incorporate the principles he outlined. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré returned to a hero's welcome. Thousands lined the streets of Ouagadougou to greet him, waving signs that read "Our land, our climate, our future." In a rally at the National Stadium, he addressed the crowd. They said we could not defend our gold. We proved them wrong. They said we could not defend our borders. We proved them wrong. And now they say we cannot defend our forests and our earth. But together, we will prove them wrong again. Africa belongs to Africans, and the earth belongs to all, but no one has the right to steal our tomorrow. His words echoed through the night, carried by chants of thousands. Traoré, Traoré, Africa will rise. And as the stars glittered over the dark Sahel sky, one thing became clear. Ibrahim Traoré had positioned himself not just as a national leader, but as a continental voice, a young revolutionary challenging a centuries-old global order, one bold stand at a time. In the aftermath of his powerful stance on climate justice, Ibrahim Traoré found himself confronted with yet another critical issue that would test both his leadership and his vision for a united Africa. This time, the challenge came not from external pressures, but from within the continent itself. The rise of armed insurgencies in the heart of the Sahel region, threatening to engulf Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and beyond. The situation had been steadily deteriorating for years. But it reached a tipping point when a series of coordinated attacks by extremist groups targeted civilian populations, military outposts, and critical infrastructure in several border regions. These groups, often linked to jihadist networks like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, had used the porous borders between countries to evade capture and expand their influence. The violence escalated, and millions of people were displaced, with entire villages abandoned and left vulnerable to insurgent forces. For Ibrahim Traoré, the situation presented an existential threat not just to Burkina Faso, but to the entire Sahel region. He was acutely aware that the Sahel, a vast arid expanse spanning across several West African nations, could easily become a breeding ground for further instability if not addressed swiftly and decisively. While many neighboring nations called for international intervention, Traoré remained resolute in his belief that the solution must come from within Africa itself. Led by African forces and guided by African interests. In a national address to the people of Burkina Faso, Traoré struck a stern tone, outlining his government's approach to counter the growing threat. We will not allow Burkina Faso to become a battleground for foreign powers, nor will we let extremists use our soil to spread their poison, he said. It is time to fight. Back with everything we have, and we will do so with our brothers and sisters from across the Sahel. This is our fight, and it is one we must win for the future of our children and our continent. His strategy, dubbed the Sahel United Response, aimed to create a coalition of regional forces drawn from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and other neighboring countries to form a unified front against the insurgents. The plan involved not only a military crackdown but also a robust program of community engagement, education, and development to tackle the root causes of extremism and disenfranchisement in the region. One of the key elements of the plan was the formation of local defense units composed of trained civilians and militia members from the affected regions, who would work alongside professional soldiers. Traoré's government also promised to provide much-needed economic support for displaced populations and communities devastated by the violence. "We cannot fight this war only with guns," he explained. "We must win the peace by rebuilding our communities, by giving our youth hope, and by bringing justice to those who have been oppressed." The regional response quickly gained traction. In neighboring Mali, President Assimi Goïta expressed his support for the initiative, and Niger's leadership followed suit, offering both troops and logistical support. The newly formed Sahel coalition began joint operations to clear insurgent strongholds and secure vital roads in border regions. While Traoré's critics argued that the coalition might spark further violence or retaliatory attacks from extremists, his supporters saw it as a bold and necessary step toward regional sovereignty and self-determination. In Ouagadougou, the Burkina capital, Traoré's government implemented a national unity mobilization campaign, calling on citizens to support the security forces and to stay vigilant against the spread of extremist ideology. Volunteers poured into military training camps, eager to play a part in protecting their country. As part of the mobilization, Traoré also called for an ambitious educational reform to provide young people with alternatives to radicalization. Schools began offering classes on peacebuilding, conflict resolution, and civic responsibility, in an effort to raise a generation that would be less vulnerable to the extremist narratives that had plagued the region. Despite the challenges, the coalition began to see early successes. Several key insurgent leaders were captured or killed in joint operations, and areas that had once been controlled by extremists began to see the return of displaced families. Still, the threat was far from eradicated, and many people remained skeptical about the ability of local forces to maintain security in the long run. One of the most telling moments of the crisis came when Ibrahim Traoré visited the northern town of Ouagadougou, which had been recaptured from insurgent forces just days earlier. He arrived with a convoy of soldiers, along with humanitarian aid workers and local leaders. As he walked through the streets, surrounded by cheering crowds, he knelt beside a mother who had just returned to her home with her children after being displaced for months. "Your courage is our strength," he told her as cameras captured the emotional moment. "We are fighting for your future, for the future of all the children of Africa." His words resonated deeply with both Burkinabe citizens and those across the Sahel, who saw him as a leader who understood the real stakes of the conflict. His promise to continue the fight with local forces and to rebuild the region was a beacon of hope amid the violence and uncertainty. However, Traoré's approach did not go without challenges. As the military operations continued, reports of civilian casualties and human rights violations began to surface. Humanitarian organizations called for more protection of non-combatants and better measures to ensure that the military was not inadvertently contributing to the region's instability. Traoré's government responded by creating a special oversight body to investigate these reports and hold those responsible accountable. Meanwhile, the international community looked on with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Western powers, long involved in anti-terrorism operations in the Sahel, were wary of Burkina Faso's growing independence in handling the crisis. But Traoré was clear in his intentions. "We welcome international support, but the future of our region will not be shaped by foreign powers," he said during a diplomatic visit to Addis Ababa, where he presented a bold proposal for the African Union to take a leading role in peacekeeping efforts. Back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré's popularity surged as citizens from all walks of life rallied behind the fight to secure a peaceful future for their country. The Sahel United response continued to evolve. with Traoré emphasizing the need for a multifaceted approach that balanced military action with community-driven development. Asterisk in Ouagadougou, graffiti appeared on the walls reading, "Our land, our fight, our victory." And as Ibrahim Traoré stood at the forefront of a new chapter in the Sahel struggle for peace, he understood that this battle was not just for security, but for the soul of Africa itself, a continent that refused to be dictated to by anyone, no matter the odds. Asterisk as the Sahel Coalition's campaign against insurgents continued to unfold, and Ibrahim Traoré's name became synonymous with African resistance and unity, a surprising development came from an entirely different arena. Technology. One quiet morning in Ouagadougou, news broke that a group of young Burkina engineers and innovators at a government-backed research hub had developed the prototype of what they claimed was Africa's first fully homegrown electric vehicle. It wasn't imported, it wasn't assembled from foreign parts. It was designed, engineered, and built entirely in Burkina Faso using a mix of locally sourced materials and recycled components. Asterisk, the prototype, a compact four-seater car named Wenpanga, meaning God's gift to the people and more, could travel up to 250 kilometers on a single charge and was designed to withstand the rough terrain and harsh climate of West Africa. The engineers explained that their vision was not just to make a car, but to ignite a movement toward African self-reliance in high-tech industries. Asterisk when Ibrahim Traoré visited the research hub to inspect the prototype, the scene was nothing short of electric. Cameras flashed as he shook hands with the young lead engineer, a woman in her late 20s who had grown up in one of Ouagadougou's poorest neighborhoods and studied engineering on a government scholarship. She explained to him how her team had worked day and night, driven by his message of African sovereignty and inspired by his call to stop waiting for others to solve Africa's problems. Asterisk Traoré stood before the vehicle and smiled, then turned to the assembled media. Asterisk, this, he said, is the Africa we dream of. Not an Africa that only exports raw materials. Not an Africa that begs for second-hand technology. But an Africa where our own sons and daughters create, innovate, and lead the world. Asterisk, he then took the prototype for a short test drive around the grounds to the cheers of journalists and engineers alike. The image of the young revolutionary leader driving the electric Wenpanga quickly went viral, becoming an iconic moment. Asterisk in the days that followed, Traoré announced a bold initiative to build on this breakthrough, a national innovation and technology plan. The plan aimed to establish state-of-the-art research centers in every region of the country, provide funding for young entrepreneurs and inventors, and create partnerships between universities and industries to commercialize local innovations. He even proposed tax incentives for businesses that agreed to manufacture their products using predominantly African components and workforce. Asterisk. His government also launched a campaign called Build Africa, Buy Africa, encouraging citizens to support local products and businesses from agriculture to tech. Billboards appeared across Ouagadougou featuring Traoré's now famous line, "Africa's destiny is built by African hands." Asterisk the momentum spread quickly. Other West African nations began sending delegations to Ouagadougou to study the Wenpanga project and discuss potential collaboration on regional production of electric vehicles and batteries. Mali expressed interest in contributing its lithium reserves to supply battery manufacturing, while Ghana offered to collaborate on charging infrastructure powered by solar energy. Asterisk, but, as always, the idea was not without its critics. Some analysts argued that Burkina Faso's economy and infrastructure were not ready for such ambitious industrialization. International auto companies warned of unrealistic expectations and warned that local production could not yet compete with imported. Vehicles on price or reliability. Traoré remained undeterred. In an interview on Burkina State Television, he acknowledged the challenges but dismissed the criticism. They told us we could not defend our gold. We did. They told us we could not defend our land. We did. And now they tell us we cannot. Build our own future? Watch us. His words once again inspired a wave of optimism across Burkina Faso, especially among the youth. High school students began forming tech clubs to design their own gadgets. Local mechanics started experimenting with converting old petrol motorcycles into electric ones. University campuses buzzed with discussions about engineering, coding, and renewable energy. To further demonstrate his commitment, Traoré ordered a fleet of Wenpanga prototypes to serve as official government vehicles within 2 years. He also set an ambitious goal. By 2030, at least 30% of vehicles on Burkina roads would be locally produced electric models. On the day Wenpanga's production line officially opened, Traoré gave a rousing speech at the newly built factory on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Standing before the factory workers and engineers, he declared, "Today, we take another step toward our liberation, not just political, not just military, but economic and technological. This factory is more than a place where cars are made. It is a symbol of our refusal to accept the role others wrote for us. It is proof that Africa is not destined to follow, but to lead." As he cut the ribbon and the first production model. Wenpanga rolled off the line. Workers erupted in cheers, chanting, "Wenpanga, Wenpanga, Traoré, Traoré." And so, yet again, Ibrahim Traoré had turned a challenge into an opportunity, a vision into reality, fueling not just a new industry, but a new belief in what Africa could achieve when it believed in itself.